Welcome to Lit Chat, where we chit-chat about the lit, and we are here for a nice, lovely Christmas edition of our lovely little podcast. I wish I had cocoa, but I do not. So today we are going to talk about A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, a story probably everybody is familiar with in some form or other. It was written in sometime in the 1800s, early 1800s, and has been reproduced an innumerable amount of times. 1843, that's when it was. Oh yes, by the way, I'm Chandler White. And you?
I'm Madelyn Parker.
Yes. And so we are here to talk about it today. A Christmas Carol, the general story, for those of you who do not know, is about Ebenezer Scrooge, this old miser or debtor, as they were called back then, or misers, and he is a curmudgeon, as one would say. He does not like Christmas. He doesn't really like life in general, and he hates the people who do like life. Bottom line, he is visited by 3 ghosts over the course of one night. The ghost of Christmas past, the ghost who shows him Christmas is in the past, the ghost of Christmas present, who kind of goes out and shows him what's happening that night, and then the ghost of Christmas future, who shows him a particularly bleak future where he is dead and goes to hell, which is enough to scare somebody out of their Christmas pants. But one of the things we are covering is the aspect of time travel in this.
Yeah, so not only is Scrooge a curmudgeon, but he might be a time traveler. So there are several different kinds of time traveling, and we'll mention maybe 2. So one is where you only go forward, nothing changes, and nothing is really getting in loops. So this consistent time traveling, and then there's time traveling with a changed trajectory, which we think might be the Christmas Carol. But that's up for some debate because there are 2 different kinds of time travel that also happen in this story.
It's about to get all colors of complicated, I'll just warn you guys now. But, so the reason I think the position of the fact that, like, the time travel in A Christmas Carol creates multiple trajectories is just because he wouldn't have... Because the end of the story, spoiler alert, is whenever he goes back from Christmas future, he wakes up and realizes that he's been a douchebag his entire life, and he decides, I'm going to change my ways, and then he goes out and celebrates Christmas and is nice to everybody, and basically is a reformed man. And then this would not have happened if he had not seen the future, or at least what could have been the future. If he had carried on at that state. Because if we can't really ascertain what would have happened had he not had these dreams. The only thing we know is the end aspect, which is essentially Tiny Tim, the son of one of his employees, dies because he didn't pay his employees, and Scrooge is essentially responsible for this death because he refused him any money. And I think if he had not seen this, I mean, it's hard to speculate on that, but I think for certain that the book directly implies that if he had not seen this future would not have come to be. And so it was the breakage of the 4th dimension of time that enabled him to go back and change the trajectory using his present, even though he was not able to change what already happened.
But the idea is that this future where Scrooge dies and Tiny Tim dies and there's this awful fate, it still exists, but it's existing somewhere else, and Scrooge has changed the direction of where his consciousness goes. But the question is the future that he sees really a tangible thing? Is it actually the future that he goes to? Or, is it, could someone consider that as a real tangible future that he's avoiding? Or is it just something that his seeing from Providence that's just warning him? And also, could that be considered still real, even though it's a warning from Providence?
Yeah, there's many different layers to this particular discussion. And the question of multiverses is a very prominent one whenever it comes to the subject of time travel and just physics in general. And one of the things I do love about Christmas Carol is the way it describes each of the ghosts directly matches the way that those concepts could be considered. Like the past, it describes how you can only see part of it, like certain parts of it at one time, and the way you can't really see all of the past at once in your head. But the ghost of Christmas future is described as being, other than just being a bleak, kind of Grim Reaper-esque figure, is described as being obscure, as being very dark, and no distinguishing features can really be seen on it. And so that's sort of a parallel to the way that this future is debatable or spurious in its very existence. I mean, because it's never specified where these ghosts come from naturally. But if we were to assume that it's matching up with Christian theology, being that he does witness himself in hell, and I believe even Lucifer's like referenced a couple times, I might be misremembering, but so if we were to assume this does come from Christian theology, we would have to ask the question of, can multiverses exist in a Christian model of the world, and I guess what births Christmas?
Yeah, well, exactly, because as a kid, when I would, like, listen to the story every Christmas, it would be, I just saw it as this, like, unformed thing, and not really something that had already happened. But, I mean, I'll play devil's advocate and bring in other time-traveling shows and their theories about things. But, like, in Doctor Who, if you speak something and say that something's going to happen, it becomes unavoidable. So how does that, like, play into the question of, like, him seeing his future, but he can change it? Because if you go by the physics of, like, tangibly acknowledging that it's something that happened, meaning that it does happen now, then I don't know, where do you categorize this then through science and faith and religion? Yeah,
it's a knot of concepts, because something I hear all kinds of people reference for time travel in fiction is the third Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, because it's sort of known for having a time travel model that is perfectly consistent with itself, in that no matter how you travel, no matter how you spin it, you cannot change what has happened. So bottom line is, if you go back and time travel to the past, you will have already known. I guess I'll use the example from the book, because Harry's life is saved by someone he can't see, just an unknown source. And when he goes back in time, he realizes that he is that unknown source. And so he has to do that saving. He has to do that task. There is really no free will there. And so if we were going by that, but we'd have to flip it on its end and point it towards the future, because that's the only part that I guess causes Scrooge to change some part of a trajectory. So is there a universe of A Christmas Carol where he still ends up becoming the same person and killing Tiny Tim and not changing his ways?
I don't know. I guess you could say, like, it scares him so basically shitless that he has to change. So maybe that's his Harry Potter moment where he saves himself and now he has to. So he goes into the future and he gets so scared out of his mind that because he's been scared out of his mind, I don't know if that makes any sense. Does that make any logical sense?
Logical sense is hard right now.
He no longer has the free will to choose to continue being an awful person because he's so scared out of his free will.
Yeah, or like he's, moved in such a way that sets him in motion towards a particular future. But then again, I mean, I don't know, he proclaims that he's going to, change his ways or whatever.
Yeah.
But if that future is a timeline that is perfectly preserved and because he's not even allowed to change it when he goes there. He's only allowed to witness it. In all of these cases, even the present, he's basically brought there incorporeally out of his body. And so he's just acting as a spectator of the future, which means that he can't affect it directly, but I guess the intent of the Christmas Carol, or A Christmas Carol, and something that sort of is kind of consistent with all of Dickens' work, is that there's this point of like, but you have the power to change the future if you use the present. It's like you can't change what has already happened to you, and so if you want your future to be good, you need to sort of get over that past and look in the here and the now and do what is the here and the now, which is the reason the Ghost of Christmas Present is like this very jolly, very generous, very like a lush and feasting kind of ghost, because it suggests how rich the present is for opportunities and for opportunities to change the future, I guess.
That kind of convinces me that, okay, this makes me think of something else. Talking about Christian stories in relation to this, Mary finding out that she's carrying Christ child. So,
ooh, that is true.
How would that affect things if she doesn't necessarily travel into the future, but think of an angel as a time traveler? So the angel goes back from the future. I mean, this is all hypothetical. I know this is not how the Bible works, but think about...
That's where literature exists.
Yeah.
Hypotheticals.
Hypotheticals. And sweet little nuanced hypotheticals. So this angel's a time traveler. Comes back from the future to talk to Mary and say, you will conceive this child, so you need to marry Joseph and he'll take care of you. So, like, is there a conceivable future that has already happened where Mary wasn't told this and was like shamed by Joseph and like probably stoned to death, and now we don't have the Messiah anymore because the angel didn't tell her about the future?
You gotta find another person to anonymously magically impregnate. That's interesting because I remember C.S. Lewis talks about how I think Slaughterhouse-Five actually touches on this concept in a way. I haven't read it, but about the entire future to people beyond the fourth dimension, to beings who do not, I guess, abide by time. It's as if all of history and time is happening at once.
At the same time. Yeah, I remember that concept because I did read Slaughterhouse-Five, and that's kind of how it works. So that, because he would always go back to certain times in his life and not in chronological order.
It's postmodern.
Yeah, but that's kind of nuts. Like, how many different alternate futures are there of Mary with the Christ child?
Yeah.
Like, you know, and even with Scrooge, like, are there more options for him than just the one that he sees? Is there more things that could have happened to him? Like, maybe he did change his ways, and then misfortune befell him, and he didn't get to become that great person that he wanted to become. Because, like, there could be alternate realities that we don't even know about, that he doesn't even know about, that he didn't get to see.
Yeah, and how what ghost of Christmas, like, alternate present is gonna bring him to see that? It's interesting because you have to get into the physics of miracles, but A Christmas Carol is often referred to, or I've heard it be referred to as a Gothic story, and Gothic literature, other than being sort of dark and gloomy and generally melancholic, one of the distinguishing features of it is that it reflects on the past, and it has to do with the past imposing on the present, which is kind of like the opposite of time travel, where it's normally the present imposing on the past, and then altering the future. But with Gothic literature, it's always something from the past, like a ghost. And time travel is kind of if you took that thing and turned it backwards, or at least in the case of the Christmas Carol, where the future imposes on the present and causes a different trajectory to happen. But if we were going more realistically, and it's pretty hard to be realistic when it comes to time travel, but if we were going more realistically, I think it's safer to say that Scrooge is pretty much screwed, no pun intended, either way it goes. And that future may be definite, but then you have to ask some questions about God.
Yeah, well, I mean, definitely the time traveling to the future is changeable, but when you go to the past, nothing changes, and you lose that free will. So, like, I feel like even if you pin down one kind of rule for how time travel works, even in just this book, because there's no way you can pin down how time travel works in general. But it doesn't work because it's not the same for the past. The past is not as changeable, which logically it should be. If you can take information from the future and use it in the present, then technically if you're going from the present to the past, you're still taking information from the future to the past, because the past's future is the present, if that's not a convoluted sentence right there. Yeah.
And a good example of this, and something Christmas Carol is actually certain moments of it are very similar to, is the Book of Revelation. If you have all this future vision, and the Book of Revelation, is the last book of the Bible. It involves John. It's John, right? Yeah, John has a vision of essentially the end of the world, the apocalypse, and he basically writes it all down.
Basically, shitstorm is what it is.
Yeah, it's not pretty. It's not like an uplifting book. And so, with this knowledge of the future, and he's not a direct participant either, really. And so, with all this knowledge of the future, it kind of affects Christian theology leading up to that point. So, Revelation would have to have been written about a reality in which Revelation has already been written and then defined the actions of innumerable Christians around the world and through several centuries. And so I guess the difference here, though, is that John obviously writes this book of Revelation and it goes into the Bible, so it goes across the world, whereas Scrooge does not tell anybody about what he has seen. He just kind of internalizes it to himself. Yeah,
well, and is Revelation, when you consider that, the traveling that Scrooge does to the future or the traveling that Scrooge does to the past? Because if it's unchangeable and there's no way, I mean, I don't know how you feel about Revelation. I don't. I've got several, but that's not what we're talking about. But if it's Scrooge traveling to the past, it's unavoidable, so it doesn't really matter what we know. everything that has been said is going to happen if we're just talking about this as the future information. But if it's we're talking about Scrooge traveling to the future, are there alternate realities where revelation has happened and isn't going to happen now? Or is this a reality where revelation's happening and it might not happen in other realities? Like, I mean, that's kind of trippy to think about. I don't know. I mean, it doesn't matter how crazy you think that story is, like, in terms of time travel and alternate realities, that if it's something avoidable, it still happened somewhere else.
Yeah, this is like Lit Chat LSD edition. This is just like incredibly warping. And it makes a good point, though, because we are working on the assumption that it's the future that causes Scrooge to end up altering his ways. But it's kind of his character kind of has an evolution throughout the whole process. So seeing the past and and sort of having an internal commentary on it, and then seeing what's happening in the present while he's, all huddled up in his I Hate Christmas cloak, those arguably end up, I guess, affecting the future, like the trajectory of a future reality more than the future. And so if he hadn't even seen the future, this could all, even if he does see the future, I mean, it's easy to kind of be like, this is all probably just a dream he had about some kind of psychological...
self-guilt or something like that.
Yeah, some kind of Freudian roundabout. I don't know.
Well, that makes me think, okay, like you mentioned, like even if he didn't know what the future was, could you perceptively be changing the future like every millisecond if you don't know what the future is? Like if you don't know what it is, but you do something, and like do you have to know what the future is to be able to create new realities? So like something that you just choose not to do, what if you kind of were going to do that? And I don't know if we're still talking about time travel anymore, which is why I'm asking, do you have to know what the future is to be able to create alternate future paths?
Yeah, I don't think so. If we were going by multiverse theory, then an insane amount of multiverses exist just on like the bare movement of atoms. But Scrooge is quoted as saying, are these the signs of things that must be, or things that may be only? And he's asking the ghost of Christmas future, saying, are these things that I can change? Are these things that can be prevented if I do something different in the present? And luckily, since he's not going in the past to change anything there, there's less possibility for loops, because he can't interact with his future self whenever he's dead.
Well, I feel like it's almost like is he really time traveling? Is he really like being able to change things based off of time travel if all of these realities exist already based on that theory, and that time can shift in any way based on like a decision that you make? So really, is this just Scrooge getting to like pick your own adventure? Like it was gonna happen anyway, so just pick the one you like better, and then he just got to. Like, so is it really time travel at all? We said this was going to be a podcast about time travel, and now I'm questioning if it even really is.
We should go back and change it. Back in time.
We should go back in time and change.
I would pay to play a Choose Your Own Adventure Christmas Carol game. That would be interesting.
So we'll just go back and choose the alternate reality where I didn't start questioning everything around me.
We wouldn't have a podcast now, would we? I hate to get Nietzschean nihilist about it, but like, it is kind of a question of like, is Scrooge choosing a necessarily better future, or is it just a different one? Has he created his own trajectory, or has he just sort of slipped from one into another? Has he like unintentionally changed dimensions just by having a thought of I should do something differently, and then just by that virtue of that thought and his continuing to exist in a forward progression ends up breaking from one reality into another one?
Well, yeah, we don't even know if he did actually get into a new reality, because all we know is that he tries to be a better person in that moment, but we don't know about everything leading up to his death. So it could be like the Harry Potter situation where he actually has no free will and he just dies anyway, but he was nice for a little bit there. Like, he has a little moment of glory.
Yeah. The sad part is you could totally imagine, unless you're watching I think in the musical version of this, they like celebrate Scrooge's funeral. I'm not sure if that happens in the book, but Jesus Christ, that's dark. It could be possible that he just died of like natural causes before he could give Bob Cratchit enough money. And so it had absolutely nothing to do with him being a nice guy or not. And Tiny Tim was going to kick it either way. But I guess that's what's so wonderfully interesting about this is that the time travel in this could exist in almost any conceivable way. It could be, it could be the Harry Potter Prisoner of Azkaban way, where everything that is seen is the one and only reality, and that's it. Or it can be, it can be interpreted with the multiverse theory. It can be interpreted with, what knowledge Scrooge has that gets to change it. Because, he doesn't actually go anywhere, but his brain, I guess, is altered with knowledge throughout the process of this time traveling experience.
Oh, do you know what that makes me think of?
What?
There's this, I found a short film, I was browsing through YouTube and I found a short film, and the idea is this guy's trying to ask this girl out, and every time he fails, he pushes the time machine and takes him back 5 minutes. And she says she is actually coincidentally a professor, and she knows about time theory. And she says every time you do that, the person you in that reality dies, and then you go to a new reality. So that just makes me think of like going back in time and trying to change things, like it's just like there's a dead you somewhere else in some other reality. So like Scrooge's brain travels to a new place, and Scrooge is just dead in another reality. And
yeah.
So not even the reality where he goes to his death, to his funeral, but if his actual consciousness travels from that one reality to a new one where that's possible, then he just kind of dies right there. He doesn't have the funeral. So maybe that reality is like cut short, because if his consciousness leaves, I don't know if this is too confusing for you guys, but like...
Oh yeah, keep putting up with us, we're going a million miles a minute today. And you can actually, I think you can turn Christmas Carol on itself that way, because something, I guess it's Achilles' heel is that it's kind of implied that these ghosts come from a Christian origin, essentially. But if this were multiverse theory, and if there were multiple Scrooges, how do you define a soul? How do you define which Scrooge goes to heaven? How do you define how that individual works, or how God, manages all these different things? Could you contradict the theology of Christmas Carol and Christmas itself just with the story that Charles Dickens has formed and a little bit of physics? Yeah,
and like, is his soul like spread out inside all of the different alternate realities of Scrooge, or is he just a bunch of puppets, and then whenever he wants to hop around to a new reality, that one isn't dead? I don't know.
Yeah, well, because in time, people change depending on what happens to them. So the Scrooge at one reality that ends up going to heaven, the other one might either go to hell or go to heaven and just be a completely different person. But then where do you draw that line? Or is heaven just going to be filled with 1 million different yous? Or infinite, I guess, because multiples are infinite.
God, so whenever you're I'm so much more of a different person than I was 10 years ago, is that because you're actually not you? Is because you went to a different timeline and you went to this one? Yeah. What are we even talking about anymore?
Well, I gotta do a line of coke before this next one.
Oh my god.
No, this is because the Scrooge, he did die in the future, but the Scrooge that he probably died of just over douchiness. But then the new Scrooge, what if he dies of overjoy, laughing to death?
His little tiny body can't handle that. He doesn't know how to handle joy. I could see that happening. He just explodes.
Kind of like the Grinch.
Yeah. Oh gosh.
So that's I'm probably gonna take a nap after this podcast just to sort of recover.
Well, and when you wake up, you're not really gonna know. Are you really where you were when you fell asleep?
For real though. You could get into psychology, other than just transcending, this subject of physics and sort of the philosophy of it. A Christmas Carol delves into morality. It delves into the question of what humans would do if they knew the truth of their actions. It also delves into psychology, because you could refute all of this saying this is just Scrooge having some kind of epiphany moment, some Joycean epiphany. Or it also delves into the nature of dreams and how are they manifestations of what's already there, or are they your brain sort of working independent from you, and is your own mind a different individual from you?
So are you saying are your dreams the culmination of consciousness of multiple yous in different timelines?
Yeah. When you're asleep, is that the only time the different versions of you can interact? And I guess that's why angels would come in that time as well, because it's in a state transcendent of the confines of of our conscious
Yeah.
reality, of our observable universe, so they say.
Well, sometimes my dreams are just nuts. Like, they're just crazy. And I'm like, where did this come from? Alternate reality me has done something, and I'm getting her memories for the day. Maybe that's what it is. Mm-hmm. Which really, yeah. So, like, when you take that nap and you wake up again, you're going to be like, what reality am I in now? Like,
that's how I feel. Because even with dreams, like, there's a lot of dream theories out there, because science still hasn't really nailed down why human beings dream. There's all kinds of different theories, one of them being that it prepares us for evolutionary circumstances that may arise in reality. So you would dream about having a wrestle or like a fight with some predator, so that whenever you awake, you know what to do. And with The Christmas Carol, I mean, if this is the visions of things that may be a dream of what might happen, this better, in evolutionary language, it better prepares Scrooge for preventing that from happening with his actions.
But, like, here's the thing. So, like, in evolutionary terms, I mean, I'm not an expert on evolution, but the basic gist is that we continue to improve and be able to do more things than we were able to do before. So, like, what if a dream is like telling you that, like, hey, in this timeline, things go bad for you and you die early. So, survival of the fittest, in order for us, our consciousness, to be able to continue, here's this dream, and you have to use it to be able to hop to another reality where you continue to your consciousness. Which, okay, wild thought, but, like, could this be immortality, or would you still die at, like, an old age?
That's a good question. Immortality.
I feel like you'd have to flesh out a few more ground rules for you to be able to hop to new realities in the timeline to be able to live forever, because there's nothing that says that aging still continues. So I think you probably would die. But, like, you could prolong it to, like, 120. I don't know. Like, if you go to a alternate reality where health and, like, medical research has been so far advanced that, like, you can live to 130. But then, like, is it really the time traveling that makes you immortal, or is it just that you found, like, a nice place that's got great health benefits? Like,
yeah.
What is...
Yeah, or at least get a tour of all your different universes before you wake up. And speaking of, we mentioned LSD once, maybe we'll still get on the topic again. The thing about this particular drug is that it opens up parts of your brain to other parts of it that normally aren't accessed. So it basically makes your brain one entire whole. And that is why a lot of people associate it with these revelations, or, like, you know, seeing suddenly the reality or the universe in such a clear way or whatever. So if the human brain has the capacity, if you know, engaged in its full thing, and if we were to engage it as an entire product and let it come to its full capacity, they say that, you know, the brain only reaches 10% of its capacity in any given day. If we were to fulfill that to a 100%, would we be able to have dialogue with the different, you know, multiversional us's? None of that was words, and is that what happens in dreams? At least some taste of that.
That makes a lot of sense. Is that what happens? Is that what makes the ghost of Christmas past, the ghost of Christmas present, the ghost of Christmas future? Is that what makes them so omnipotent? Is that they have been able to do that with their brains? They have that capacity. And, like, the angel, like, I mean, it's been a long time since we talked about Mary, but, like, the angels that come in many different biblical stories, what makes them angels? What makes them... I mean, is it that their brains can communicate with their multiple selves in these multiple realities? Or, like, are angels transcendent of these different realities? Like, does that even apply to them at all because they're angels? Like, I don't even know.
That's a good question. And A Christmas Carol is apparently full of those whenever you apply theoretical physics to it. But honestly, I mean, to me, that's the mark of a good story, is, like, that infinite interpretability to the point where it swallows all of life in one cohesive bite. So, y'all have a Merry Christmas, and give it some thought. Give time travel some thought while you're sipping cocoa, or maybe just save yourselves the headache that we just caused ourselves and just relax by the fire.
Don't open any presents from strangers, because you might wind up in a different reality.
Yeah.
So, thanks for listening to our crazy tirade.
We'll be back with more of those crazy tirades whenever we're back. I'm Chandler White.
Madelyn Parker.
And this was Lit Chat.